Yeah, amazing. And also, I mean, environmental, social, or better said, societal and governance issues. It's such a volatile climate. I mean, many will have seen what's happening in the US and this huge backlash on what is being classed as wokeism and greenwashing and the anti-climate agenda, all these sorts of things that are coming through. So it's a very volatile context that I think law firms need to know about. But it's also very interesting when we are listening to everybody, we talk about the client, but who actually is the client? It's not newsflash, the general counsel. The general counsel is obviously a key stakeholder within the client environment, but it's actually the entity, the operation, the organization represented by the board, but really the shareholders in a traditional governance context. So actually, we'll just put a pin in that for the second thing I want to talk to, which is governance. But yes, there's two things I wanted to draw out. There's many things I cover in the chapter, including this point, which actually Paul just referenced, which relates to integrity and the congruence that clients smell a mile off if you are not speaking authentically as a law firm. If you're taking on ideologies and you're trying to propose things and put things forward as if they're the truth, but really they're not who you are as a firm. So I think it's really important for law firms to know exactly what they're there to do and then do it and be congruent with that, and not try to sort of take on any bandwagoning. I think that's very important. But I wanted to highlight two particular things. One is getting with the program on delivery for clients, and the other is getting with the program on governance for clients. And this is all in the context, as I say, of the really volatile geopolitical environment. So this first one around delivery, the first one is actually something that Thomas picked up on, which is it's more important than ever now to be able to advise clients contextually. So it's not just about, here's my expertise, here's the answer to your question. I need you to understand as a client, I need you to understand as a law firm, the context in which I'm operating. So what's happening in my supply chain, what's happening in the industry, what's happening in the competitive environment around the industry. Have we just had a shift in leadership? So there's a new exec or there's a new chair. All the things that technology makes it actually very easy for firms to know about. Like back in the day, you would have to ask somebody for organizational context. Now it's across the press and it can take you 30 seconds to get the update on that context. So then everything you're giving off to that point in relation to advisory is contextual to that. And I think that's very important in relation to the ESG agenda because of the shifts in regulatory. We've got now a deregulatory agenda coming out of certain markets, whilst legislation is still being implemented across particularly the environmental category. You need to stay up to date with that. What are the pressures on firms and advise in the context of that? And this, to me, is more of a consultative approach than I think law firms have taken in the past, bringing adjacencies forward for a firm, for a client. It used to surprise me how few calls I received when, for example, in a fintech I was working in payments, something would happen in the payments industry and no one would call me. Wouldn't be like, hey, Jenifer, I saw that this thing just happened and maybe therefore you might be thinking about X, Y, and Z. There was a sort of lack of this contextual, adjacency-driven advisory and an excuse to have a touch point with your clients and bring value and sell in. So that would be number one. The second thing is about technology and operationalization of advice, if I can put it that way. So what happens is clients receive advice and then they have to go and implement it in various different ways. They have to thread it through policies or procedures or into documents, or they have to translate it into risk and advisory onward. And I actually think there's, particularly from the context of all the topics, so ESG really is a very large bucket of things that otherwise already existed. Whether they're compliance issues, whether it's about responsibility through supply chains or through workforces, whether it's about governance environments, all of those things, once you've received advice on them, you have to go and do something with them. So the ask would be, number one, to be deploying technology for those types of pieces of advice. So if you're using best-in-class technology, you can, for example, code a document so that it will, and this might sound science fiction to you, but it's actually very straightforward, code a document so that it can automate certain elements of its terms. so that then you've already given the client the ability for that thing to automate itself. And actually, there are programs and tools that can do that. You may enable documents to be provided in structured data, so that it's much easier for them to talk to different systems. And you can also provide, and this is something that used to be very common when I started out, you can provide teams that can go in as SWAT teams to client environments to actually operationalize the piece of advice. So let's say you've suggested a number of things that need to be done under an environmental category of work, but you know that that client has to then go and make that real inside the organization. Offer a team at a correct price point that they can go in and actually do the work alongside the team internally, get it done, the project's complete, rather than knowing you're going to give that to an overloaded in-house team that then has to find capacity to do it. So I think actually law firms are missing a bit of a step in their resourcing model in relation to more practical support. The second thing is around governance and getting with the program on governance. So it used to be the case in law firm world that the only governance you needed to worry about was anti-money laundering, conflicts management, and handling client money. Those days are gone. Client environments now need you to have your operations and infrastructure governance elements way better established. So that includes, for example, if you are part of a supply chain of a client, which you are, and I know all law firms like to think they're very special, but you're still just part of a supply chain from the client's point of view, you need to have your emissions reporting in place if they have to report. So they have to come to you and ask for emissions information so that they can do their compliance reporting on just the environmental elements and all the reporting requirements they have around the world. If you don't have that in place, that's a problem for them. Same with procurement. I think there's a lot of work that law firms could do to make that procurement cycle more straightforward. But that's one example. I just feel like governance needs to go up the agenda inside law firms way more. It's about having your own house in order on ESG. But it's also around, and this is picking up, Helen, on something that you were mentioning in the intro, it's around ethics trending. So we have now an anti-corruption movement in society. People are getting sick of hearing about scandals that law firms are involved with. Law firms have become a risk on in-house counsel risk matrices. You're actually a risk. So if you look at the Post Office Horizon scandal, all of these other scandals that we see hitting the press, whether a law firm, whether you're aligned with a law firm that's doing the wrong or the right thing in relation to other client activity, that's an exposure from a supply chain point of view for a client. But in addition to that, there are a lot of in-house counsel who are very activated in a relation to integrity and independence. And the movement that is coming through our community in relation to this, the regulators, obviously, particularly in the UK, are paying a lot greater attention to independence and the infrastructure around independence. In-house counsel themselves are having to deploy greater levels of infrastructure to make sure that they can show that they're being independent, yes, acting in their clients' best interests, but they also have a responsibility to society. And they need to be structuring their own internal operations, reporting lines, insurance policies, all sorts of things in a way that they can demonstrate their own independence. And they want that from their law firms increasingly too. So I think that's important. And the final thing on governance is technology. So I'm a big tech proponent, and I think that law firms should be absolutely getting with the program on deploying technology to make it easy. Please make it easy. That would be the plea for in-house counsel, in particular on the client side. But in relation to using AI, we also have to increase our maturity as a profession in relation to governance around technology. So that's not been something we've had a specialism in before. And there's many teams that are building up multidisciplinary resourcing models to enable them to do that. But as soon as you start deploying AI, you need to also be governing how you deploy AI. And the other great thing around this is something I call coded compliance. So tools eventually will, like the cruise control on your car, have baked into the systems the controls. So the compliance will be within the machine. And we also see technology systems that can actually do AI governance for you. But at the moment, I see this is quite weak in the law firm community. So there would be some download things. Also to say that in the in the chapter we actually published before the US election, but we were prescient as to the movement around ESG as a category. My sense is ESG as a category will only prevail in relation to the investment space, where ESG is used to describe a category of assets. My sense is that ESG will stop being used as a label. Responsible business is something that's used, or sustainability more broadly now. But we will see, I think, that fragment, and it will become about the individual items, and it will be all about impact, not ideology. So happy to pick up on any of those points.